All right. Well, good afternoon. And thank you, Tatiana. Everybody can hear me good. All right. I had a earphone plugged in. I think I was trying to use a different microphone because my voice is always feels very small. So that's why I was having a hard time. But let me know if anything comes up and you can't hear me, please. But good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much. I've named this portion. I was really trying to come up with a name, and this one felt like something maybe I had attended before. I don't know, but it just felt like a good description of what it is that I would like to talk about. And oh, let's see. Can you guys? Is that? I don't want to leave the panel of people up. Is that better? I don't know if that's popping up, if you guys can see the people with the speaker.
No, only you can see the panel. We see the PowerPoint.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, and today we're going to be looking at the intersections of violence and MMIWR. So yat a hello everybody. Christine Bigay means Yenishye, Rikara Nishle, Kia Ani Bushes Chin, Yankton Dakota, Dashache, Tsayas Kidney Dashanule. So my mother is in this picture here, and this is a photo of my family. About 7.5, 8 years ago. And there's some really important people in this photo. This is who I am, as Native women, as Native people, as families, communities. We always have such a strong sense of who we come from. So the beautiful lady in the red blazer is our matriarch, my grandma. She comes from the Arikara people in North Dakota. And the lady in the red skirt is my mother. She is Yankton, Dakota, and Arikara. And then the lady in the white shirt in the back is my oldest sister, Dion. And that's me in the green shirt. And my daughter, a long time ago, my daughter's very big now, but that's a photo of my family. They are very important people to me. And I just wanted to give you a sense of who I am and where I come from with my family. I have a very strong history of family connection, of culture, of belonging, but also, with the responsibilities of being a member to the family and to the community, there comes a lot of challenges in balancing those responsibilities and the roles that we play. And so I look up to these women a lot for guidance and for understanding, until still to this day, that my family really does help me with a lot of things. So, and that picture does show my sister Dion, which is how I became a part of the MMIWR community. So just a quick overview of today. I'm going to give a presentation and just follow along with the slides of these are some of the topics that I'd like to talk about. I also want to just open up to group questions and sharing. Please feel free to hit unmute. Please feel free to insert it into the chat. I've got that limited annoying presentation when you're presenting, but you can't see the chat. So if you see something, please feel free to stop me and let me know. I also have a couple of places where I want to ask for some written responses. I see Michelle put in the chat. If you've got a paper and a pen nearby, or if you're a techie and you want to do it on your phone in your notes, there are some questions that I would just like to ask of you. And I want you to be able to honestly take a couple of minutes just to get your thoughts out. And with that is the opportunity to share. If that's an invite, it's nothing mandatory required, but that is there. And then questions and answers, please, throughout the way. I may ask you some questions, I invite them back. And then I've incorporated a couple of short breaks because I have a small infant and they come after the group written responses portion. So I've got a babysitter in between. When you all are writing, I'm going to put up a little break thing just so you know that I've stepped out just to check on the baby and make sure that everybody's doing okay outside of the door here in my house, because I'm coming to you from home in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And on the memes, I'm a meme person. I was preparing slides and I save screenshots all the time. So this is one of my many memes here that I really enjoy. So I felt like some of them may be looked at as passive aggressive. I am not meaning them towards any way with any of you all. Some of them feel like it, but just so you know, the memes mean nothing other than I like them. I feel like slides, lots of text, that's where I was headed. So I wanted to open it up so that there's something for you to look at as we go throughout the presentation here. So as I mentioned, I have a very personal experience with my entrance into the community of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and relatives. And I also have a professional experience in that I've worked with the New Mexico MMIWR task force here in Albuquerque and Santa Fe and throughout the state. And here in New Mexico, the task force is situated out of the New Mexico Indian Affairs Department. So it's at the state level. And I worked with them as an assistant to the task force. And at the time, there were 11 task force members. The task force has now multiplied and there's like 37 members. But at the time, there was just a very small group. So with my time there as a task force support person, I assisted with data collection. I helped revise, write, and edit the report that was issued in 2020. I also helped coordinate and organize some of the public meetings and events. And then we also worked with different universities and organizations. And so as a support to the task force, I did a lot of report reading. So a lot of these reports that are published, that were put out, the data, the organizations that put them out, it was part of my job to go and read a lot of these reports. And I always found that very interesting because coming from the working realm, versus my personal experience, it was always a really difficult thing because I would be reading these reports, I'd be reading this data, and I'd be saying, okay, this is what I see in writing. This is what this organization is telling me is happening. But from my own personal experience and knowing what I've been through and knowing what my family has been through and knowing what my sister has been through, what is missing? And that's a question that I've asked a lot in this line of work that I've been in. And with my personal experience with my sister in 2007, my oldest sister, Dion, who was in the picture on one of the first slides, she entered into a relationship with a person. And over the years that they were together, it became a violent relationship. And it was a really, really difficult time for my family because we saw the abuse happening. We encouraged her to leave the relationship, but it was the cycle of abuse that she was in, where there would be the breaking point where she would leave and she would want to get out of the relationship. And then in a matter of weeks, days, months, sometimes she would be gone and they would eventually get back together and they'd enter the honeymoon phase and the fantasy of we're going to make a life and things are going to be better and we're doing good. And then it would turn back into the violent. And it was a really difficult and frustrating thing to watch. So as a person who supported her and was there for her and was supported her children because my sister was a mother, it was really a heartbreaking experience, and it's still something from that I'm healing from today. So it was a matter of 8 years that her life really changed, probably a little bit longer, but from the time that I knew of it and I was a part of helping her leave each time, this was my experience as her support person, as her advocate. And sadly, in 2015, her life was taken. We lost her to violence, and um, since then, now going on 7 years, we've been advocating for her case. We are asking we're asking questions, we're asking for answers. We want to know what's happening. So the reality was once she was gone, it started this whole other chapter of what comes next. What do we do as her advocates? How do we, as her loved ones, continue to ask for something to be done? Because although as a family, as her sister, as things that were documented in the police records, it felt like it was pretty obvious what had happened. The reality is no charges have been filed. No charges exist on the records of the person who did this, who we believe did this to her. And it is an open investigation. And in a lot of ways, it's become a cold case too, because it's gone for so long. And that whole experience with advocating for her after she was gone is what has brought me to the MMIWR community, because in looking for resources and trying to find something, this is where I found support, was the community. And these are the people that have helped me in so many different ways and have helped my family advance her case. So it's gone from being a cold case to being an active case to just kind of sitting dormant, and we're asking questions and we're getting support. And, I think Renee said something earlier about her identity as a trans person and how as soon as she announces that publicly, she's politicized her being. And I think, as an advocate for my sister, once we attached ourselves to the MMIWR community and became a part of that for just heartfelt reasons, her case, my support, me even, being in working with the task force and working with the coalition, it does become a very political thing, because I go from being my sister's advocate of someone who we love to being a representative for the MMIWR community. And I think that's an interesting thing, and it's something that is just a reality, and it's something that has helped us. So I just want to recognize that. And with that, I think this is the first time that I've kind of tied the two together, my personal experiences and then also my work experiences and what I've learned. So I just want to recognize that, because I feel like for me coming into this, I thought, how do I approach this? What do I say? And working with the task force, I was always very separate from my sister's case. And then when I work with my sister's case, it's always very separate from the work I did with the task force. And this is a presentation that to me ties the two together, because we're looking at the intersection of these two different areas. So in preparing the slides, I was thinking, what do I go into detail on? What do we look at? Who are we talking to? The advocate. So in some of the ways, I feel like I brushed over some things. I didn't want to attempt to educate, because I feel like Michelle did a really great job of that this morning, showing the whole picture of MMIWR, the history, a lot of the stuff that we're dealing with what's created this perfect environment for a lot of these cases and a lot of these relatives to go missing. And so I just kind of took a different approach. And I just want to say, this is my personal experience, and, it'll be different for everybody. So if something, doesn't work with you, or something just feels like maybe, I wouldn't agree with that, I understand. And I don't mean that in any way to take the major form here. But just some other details about me to share with you. I have my bachelor's degree in psychology from Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado. And so prior to getting involved with the task force and becoming a big advocate for my sister's case, I did work in a lot of different areas. So I feel like MMIWR is its own professional area, and I'm really grateful to work alongside people from the coalition, people like Renee who are good advocates, people who are working on the task force. I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I live here with my husband, and I have 3 children. I have a 10-year-old daughter, a 3.5-year-old son who's around and may just bust in here. And then we have a 7-month-old baby. So she's the one that I've got to check on the baby throughout the time here that we're meeting, just to make sure everybody's okay. And some of the ways that I really like to release a lot of my tension, get out my stressors, just, so for me, self-care has always been very physical and a lot of movement. I like to do weightlifting, I like to do yoga, I like to go cycling. So for Tatiana to do the movement, or hear just Renee talk about different ways that they do self-care, that really is important. So I just want to throw that out there. If any of that feels like it's important to you, I feel it. I think for me, in my years of working with my sister, that's something that always was a good release for me, was the physical aspect of it all. So thank you to Tatiana for doing that physical exercise. And that's something that, I think through a lot of movement is healing, just like a lot of other things that we do. It's just one form of self-care. So this, I have an idea of who's here, because I saw the introduction this morning when Michelle was doing her presentation. And so to me, my understanding is that you all are the frontline workers in a lot of ways in with people who are experiencing violence. And I just want to invite you again, if maybe you're back, or, as a refresher, if you want to put your title in the chat box. I think it gives a good understanding, since we don't get that little mingle, the meet and greet in person, to say hello to the person next to you, to see someone, we're little square boxes on the screen here. Just a reintroduction maybe of where you're at, what your role is, and just say hello to your people. And this is a recipe, one of my favorite breakfast recipes, blue corn mush, Navajo blue corn mush. I use it all the time. I had to screenshot it on my phone. And it's to the point now where it's memorized. But if you haven't had blue corn mush for breakfast, that's what that little picture is over there. And so my experiences as an advocate and a service provider with advocates and service providers as frontline workers is really from my personal experience. A lot of times I came to you, your offices, requesting your services as a family member of a loved one who is being abused. And um, throughout her years, my family was still remained really close to her because we knew the reality of what she was living with and where she was at and what danger she was in, because the violence and the abuse was so elevated and it was happening so often. And so a lot of times, my mom was really good about supporting my sister in that. Even though we didn't support the decision she was making, my mom would make it a point to be friends with my sister's friends, because she wanted to know who she was hanging out with. She wanted to know what was going on. She wanted to learn about different people. And um a lot of times we would go with her to appointments. I would pick her up and drive her to an office. I would take her here so that she could apply to maybe get services, and it was always with the full intention of helping her leave this cycle of abuse and leave the cycle of abuse for good. And of course, over time, the way that she started to cope with her decisions and her life making, her decision making, was through alcohol. So then entered this other added level that we were dealing with, where she was not only being abused, but now she had turned to alcohol. So then not only were we seeking services to help her leave an abusive relationship, now we've added on this layer of alcohol and alcohol abuse and addiction, and trying to get her help for that as well. So depending on where you're at in the offices that you're from, the reality is that I would have come to you, I would have driven to your parking lot and been one of the customers in line, or I would have been there, the one who's taking somebody to your office space. And let's see, I just want to check the chat real quick here. Make sure I'm not missing everything. All right, I see lots of introductions. Thank you all so much for sharing your identity and your position with us today. And like Renee said earlier, a lot of us carry very different identities in life. We're still one person, we're seen as one thing, but the reality is so much of us have different identities. So beyond who you are today in this title, I want to recognize that, we all have different roles. So this is a really big topic, and I feel like you can spend a good chunk of time really dedicating understanding our own biases. But I felt like with the introduction of me and how I came to the work of what a lot of you do, this for me was important, because the reality is, when I was advocating for my sister, when I was there with her, holding her hand, driving her places, looking for help for her, she was treated really badly by a lot of the organizations and by a lot of the people who were in positions to help her. And witnessing it with my own eyes and seeing it and feeling it was a really difficult thing. um and I think that that for me created a bias, and that's where for my own experience, that's something that I've worked through, and now I'm at a different place at time. But at the time, it was really a frustrating thing to watch. And so just, I think, opening this discussion, virtual discussion, if that's just the chat, if that's just me talking to the screen here and you all listening, and it's something that we can plant for maybe later an activity, is understanding our own biases. And I think one of the biggest things about biases is that they don't make you a bad person. They are something we all carry. They are something that we each possess and we have, and they come and they go at different stages in our life. So I think for me, understanding that a bias is just this temporary, sometimes maybe long-term prejudice that really is in favor or against of a person, a thing, a group. And it usually paints the person that you're the thing that you're judging in a bad and unfair way. And so I think, for me, I learned a lot of biases in my whole experience of life, but in particular, I think, I look at my experience with frontline workers and community service providers, um, and the way that I advocated for my sister and the way that I worked with her alongside trying to get her help, it directly impacted how I view things and how I form my own ideas and how I interacted with people. And, just bringing this today, I thought about my experience with a lot of community service providers. And years ago, I felt a lot of anger towards a lot of the different offices that we went to for help. And I think that the reality was that because of who people perceived my sister as, or even perceived me as, I felt like sometimes that there was some discrimination. And it created a lot of really strong emotions in me, and I know it created a lot of strong emotions in my sister. And it just created this bias towards people, towards caseworkers, definitely towards law enforcement. And that's something that I really have had to work past, and something that I had to recognize. And so I feel like in the work of MMIWR, it's been very healing because, it was very easy at a certain time to sit and to blame. Well, they didn't do this, and she didn't do that, and the way that they handled this was really bad. Um, because there was a lot of back and forth from that, not only from my perspective, but from some of the offices and the agencies that we've worked with while she was alive, and since she's been gone, when we're looking at her as a case now. Uh, there's been a lot of that. And so I think that understanding our biases, not only as advocates, but also as people on the other side, the customers who are walking into your offices, and understanding that they're going to impact the relationships. They're going to impact the relationships with your clients, with their community members when you walk down the street. Complete strangers, we look at them and think, huh, okay, we see who they are. Yeah, they're dressed like this, so that must mean that. Oh, their family is this, so that means that. Oh, I see she's affiliated with this. So, there's a lot of biases that we carry. And, a lot of ways we can be biased is based off of gender. Renee touched on a little bit earlier about or I guess she went into depth a lot about the biases that we can carry towards relatives who don't fit the typical male female identity, especially the ones in our communities and some of the communities that are more traditional. So that's something that I think, as a community service provider, that I want to, own, one, my side of it, but two, recognize that a lot of times in this area of work, we carry our own stuff that we bring in. Every single day you come to the office, every single day you come to provide services, we've got this stuff that we just bring into it. And I think that, sometimes even when we're working with people, you see, oh, she went back. Oh, he did this again. Oh, they're back together in the cycle of intimate partner violence. That's a bias. And that's something that I am definitely guilty of in looking at my loved ones and my family or complete strangers and saying, I see that. And it just forms this discriminatory opinion. And I think that's something that happens a lot in this line of work. And that's something that I just want to be aware of, and really bring some thoughts to today. Um, and so first, this is the first little bit of writing here that I want to invite you all to. And if this is writing again with a pen and a pencil, if this is writing with just your notebook on your phone, if it's typing out a document, and this can be personally shared, this doesn't have to be shared. But I just want to bring out the opportunity for you all to take a few minutes and let's write down some of our own biases. And I think that, how they may impact me in my area of community or work, is an important perspective because it just shapes who we are and how we look at people. And at the end of this little bit of time, I want to put out an invite to share out loud with the group. That's an option if you feel comfortable with that. But just kind of giving that perspective a bit here. This little image here off to the side is from one of my uncles. And he sent me this text message, and he's very technologically on the simpler side of things when it comes to technology. So it always amazes me when we can do little things. So he sent me this message, and he had sent a photo, and he was pretty amazed with, the humble ant. And I saved this as one of my photos for my phone, one of my screensavers, because I just thought, that's pretty cool. I always look at ants here and I think, oh, the ants are back. We've bad ants here where we live. And my uncle he really put that into a good perspective for me. Okay, so right now we'll start the clock. And again, just maybe taking some time to write about our own biases. Scooch back a little here, and looking at how we may carry some thoughts of our own when we look at other people, things, a group, and how we may look at them in a way that maybe brings some prejudicial thoughts, some unfair closed-mindedness in their direction. All right, so if anybody wants to share, I want to open that up. I did get a chance to look at the chat a little bit and look at your roles, and man, I see some really great programs, who have great resources, and I see the abuse shelters and the facilities, and I just want to say thank you from my heart, because I know that a lot of times people come to you in extreme need, and people carry so much weight and baggage that as frontline workers, sometimes you don't get the nicest treatment from people. And so I just want to give you my heartfelt appreciation for your work that you do, and thank you. And was somebody gonna say something?
Yeah, this is Vivian. I'm going to just be transparent and share that I struggle to answer the questions about my biases. And I say this as a dark-skinned Black woman. So if I need to be more specific, cis heterosexual Black woman. Being that, like, my biases are not biases. What I call them is trauma responses and protective factors, because the reality is that being anti-Blackness is a global issue. And 9 times out of 10, white spaces and spaces that are not Black centered can be very violent towards me, even engaging with other communities of color. And it would be nice to go out with an open mind when I step out of my door every day, but the reality is I can't. I have to always be on the defense, because if I'm not, that reduces my chances of survival, right? Or avoiding some type of harm that can be inflicted on me by different privileged groups, whether that be men, white people, or if I go to the hair stores, unfortunately, some of the Asians can be, anti-Black, because it's taught. It's a very racist country that I live in the US. So, yeah, I just struggle with this question, just because I just see, like, I'm protecting myself, because every time I've, stepped out of, being a protective factor, it comes back to bite you every time. Even with CPS, it's just harmful. And thinking about the service deliveries that we have designed in most of our fields, and I say this as a social worker, even intimate partner violence services are not client-centered, right? Many of the domestic violence shelters across the country are not in Black and Brown communities. We typically go word of mouth to do services. And working at the shelter that I currently work at, there are times where I want to quit, because I see a lot of the violence that go on, racial violence that goes on from staff to clients, right? And having to call them out on it, like, that's not okay. This is not a prison. They're here to get help, right? And you're making them uncomfortable, or you're re-traumatizing them. You're abusive as their partner was. At times I've had to do that. So I don't know. That's just my thoughts about like, hey, I didn't answer this question because I don't think that people of color get the opportunity more often than not to even be open-minded when we want to be, which prevents us from even, I could say that we are not really trying to be biased, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, Vivian. I think that you hit a lot of stuff in that sharing how you feel. And I hearing you express your experience and understanding, what the environment that you're working in. I think that that is really important because you're right. A lot of these spaces, and Renee talked about this earlier, we're raised in this Eurocentric world, and we're raised in a very dominantly white skinned, white perception society. And I think that that plays a major role in so much of the work that we do. And I think a lot of times in tribal communities and native communities, so much of what we're doing is, it's like, the way my best thought is, it's like trying to fit the circle block into the square shaped whole. They just don't always go together. But unfortunately, because of programming and funding and the way jobs are filled and the way that programs are rewarded, the square has to fit in the square. And it's really hard to change these programs. So yeah, I think that is definitely a very valid and valuable experience to have. And I'm just going to read. Thank you for sharing, Vivian. Thinking about power analysis and how we think about bias, prejudice is important. And yes, service providers can perpetuate abuse. And, I think that's the perspective that I was coming from as a family member, as an advocate. The discriminatory attitude and just the attitude alone is so damaging to people who are coming in and wanting to get help, that the person can just look exactly like you as far as skin color goes, and with a attitude, with a look, these people, that you're being judged, that you're being looked down upon, that you're looked at as um a hindrance maybe to someone's workload. And I think that's really a critical thing to know when you're working with people who are being abused. And then on top of that, like you said, this work environment that you're in, upholding your space, the office space, the professional environment space, to do something that is more, so that the system is not abusive to the clients, as well as the workers, the people in the environment. Anybody want to add anything in there? And if not, I definitely am open to sharing.
This is Preston. I can share. Um, so I'm white, and I have worked in like white institutions for a long time, and I had built this somewhat bias that like I couldn't trust most lawyers, but in working with more Native activists, that was a very sort of like white centered um, bias still, and understanding that there are the ways that Indigenous lawyers have created so many more rights, and or at least protected those rights of Native folks. Just it wasn't in my mind a lot of time. And so I'm trying to add more nuance to sort of like my lawyer hesitancy.
Thank you, Preston. Yeah, I think there's so much mistrust, and coming as a person of color, a Native woman, I don't trust lawyers. And it's really a bad attitude. I think you're right. It's that bias. I think that you have one experience and another and another, and you close off all of it. I'll add that with my sister's case. We sought legal advice. and by 3 different offices, by 3 different lawyers. One was within the community, 2 was a little bit further out of the community. Each time we're told, there was nothing there. And finally, after the statute of limitations had expired, we were able to get a really good look over some of the documents and the evidence that we provided. And this lawyer was like, this seems like a pretty clear cut case. This, things should have, this is what the options are. This is what could have happened. But unfortunately, because you were given bad legal advice, the statute of limitations has closed. And it's these things, it's very much a frustrating and it's a damaging, it's so detrimental to the family, to my sister, to her children. And, it's got this really bad ripple effect that goes beyond into the community. So I'll add, I wanted to share something about, me as where I'm at. And I think one of my in this new phase of working and going from an advocate to working in the MMIWR community, I think one of my new biases that I've recently realized is, I'm very skeptical of working with MMIWR organizations. I've seen a lot of exploitation with this, with the momentum of hashtag MMIW, now MMIWR, MMIP. I've seen, to me, a lot of funding being collected for, we're going to work on this, and it's usually this big organization that has created, great images, and in the end, you don't really know where the money is going. So I think it becomes this utilizing media as a tool, and in a lot of ways taking advantage of families whose loved one is currently lost, or somebody who's gone now. And I think I've been approached, since I've become more of a person who's asking for help and looking for resources. I've been approached by a good amount, a handful of organizations that want to offer their help. But I'm really skeptical because I've seen the way people's cases are taken and the way their loved ones are used kind of as a way to get funds or get resources. And I don't always know if people get back, and word of mouth travels, and it makes me very much untrusting of a lot of organizations that maybe seem like they're doing good things, but I'm really careful of who I work with now. And it's definitely made me more biased towards people. Okay, and Rita Martinez, sometimes it seems that when there is a lack of response from law enforcement or service providers is to assume they don't care, but often there's a lot of capacity, training, high caseloads, lack of resources that are not addressed that hinders their effective responses. Yeah, that's very much true, Rita. This reflection is to think about, and I think Vivian gives a really great side of it. And then we've all got our own personal experiences. And I feel like, it's that self-improvement, it's that working, it's always asking and challenging yourself and those around you to do things differently and to approach things in a new way. And so that, and like I said, this is a very much surface level type of approach here, but I felt like it was so important because right off acknowledging my own biases towards people who have been in your position or similar offices is something that I just wanted to do because I felt like that was important. I think a lot of people who are on the opposite side of your desks or at your windows asking for help feel a lot of that. So I just wanted to share that and continue the bridging of resources with people. All right, and take just a really quick break. I'm going to peek out my door here and make sure everybody's okay. This is a great meme if you are familiar with Gallup in New Mexico. And if you're not, New Mexico, chili, we have a lot of tamales. We're really great. And I can totally see this thing happening here. So if you're just listening, the photo says woman throws tamale in laundromat squabble. And then it's got a newspaper clipping. A woman threw a tamale at another woman and attacked her because of a dispute over a quarter at a laundromat, according to a Gallup police report. And it's a meme from the internet. Thank you so much for allowing these breaks. When I talked to the coalition, my first thought was I can't do it. I've got a baby. They said, one, we're going virtual. Two, take breaks. It's an all-day event. So we want to encourage you to include breaks, and we want to take breaks. So I was really thankful for that, because I feel like I'm so used to working in a space that's like 8 o'clock to 11 o'clock. And then at 11 o'clock, you get your break. And then at 12 o'clock, you get your lunch. And so I was really, really surprised by the coalition, and thankful for them that I could, one, do it from home, and two, add in a little extra time here and there to make sure that my little ones were okay and taken care of during this training. So thank you, coalition, for making this a family friendly, motherly friendly workspace for me today. All right, so 2 o'clock, I'm going to get started again. Shifting the conversation. Thank you for sharing so much of your thoughts on those, the biases and the trauma responses, really, that we all work with. You know, just trying to do the work and keep moving forward. I think you're right. We don't get enough time and space to do that safely. So I think that's a good one to think about. But so moving forward, one of the things that I've constantly, and you know, I'm always thinking about this when I look at MMIW and I look at violence, is the data on violence, and what is the information that is being shared, how are we perceiving that information. And I think that there's a couple of ways we can look at it. And so one of the ways that I think is, as frontline workers, as community service providers, what comes down the email inbox, what is being displayed in your neighborhood, what is it that we're reading when we're working with people. And I wanted to look at a couple of things that show data on violence. I'm going to pull them up. This first one is a flyer that the coalition put out. And one of the things that I hear often when it comes to violence and MMIWR is, you know, the statistics, and 4 out of 5 women this, you know, New Mexico has 2 of the top 10 cities nationwide with the highest numbers of MMIWG cases. And so when I hear these statistics, something that I'm asking myself is, what does that mean? What does this data really mean? What are we looking at? And so this is one of the flyers that I wanted to share with you when we're looking at data on violence. And this is Gallup, New Mexico, Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I'm from Gallup, New Mexico, are 2 of the top 10 cities nationwide with the highest number of MMIWG cases. I live in Albuquerque. So what does this mean? What does this mean when we're looking at violence and we're looking at data and we're looking at what's being put out there? Oh, there we go. Okay, I'm going to pull up another one here. That's one example of data that's being shared. This is one that the New Mexico MMIWR task force put out. And again, we see in the top right corner, Albuquerque and Gallup are among the top 10 cities for the highest number of cases of MMIWG. Next to the yellow flag is another statistics that Native women in New Mexico have the highest rate of homicide among all racial and ethnic groups. And that one was a unique finding of the task force. Again, some data on violence and what we hear. And I feel like a lot of times the data on violence is shocking. And, you know, that's in some ways effective. But in a lot of ways, sometimes I think the data on violence is a little bit overwhelming, because we hear something and we think, oh my gosh, the numbers are so high. What can we do? 10 times more likely. Hang on, there's a flyer on here from the Urban Indian Health Institute that I wanted to use. So this flyer, this is one that really brings a lot of attention, that I want to bring a lot of attention to. And it's this flyer that the statistic, 96% on some reservations, the number of sexual violence against Native women is committed by non-Native people. And this is from the Urban Indian Health Institute. and this is from a report published a few years ago. When I'm seeing this data on violence, one, I'm wondering what is missing. Two, where is this data being collected from? And I think as a lot of times in these reports, what we're seeing on violence is data reported from state organizations or federal organizations. It's really hard to get data from tribal organizations. And a lot of times these reports are not taking into consideration the community run organizations. It's just something that it's a practice that very rarely are we seeing data collected from people who are working in the front lines of violence and a lot of the crimes that contribute to um, MMIWR, at least in my experience. And like I said, part of my job was reviewing a lot of these reports and the data that's been published. So one of the things that I'm thinking about in violence, and I'm thinking about in how it's reported and what we're looking at, is that we know a lot of crimes are going undocumented. We know that often, way more than often, violent crimes are not being reported. One, we know that two, tribal affiliation or enrollment is not reported on on crime reports. It is not required federally. It is not required by states. Maybe I think in some law enforcement, if they have an idea of that this person, or very much confirm that this person is of Native American descent, they can unofficially write that in, but there is no way for them to track the data of how this crime is being reported and who it's going against as far as Native women or Native men or Native people goes. And then one of the big things on these collections, these data pulls that are being done to report on violence, is that when these organizations pull data, for example, with the New Mexico Task Force, we requested data from law enforcement agencies across the state. IPRA requests were sent out, and of all of the police forces and all of the law enforcement agencies that were contacted, a very small handful of agencies actually responded with the data. So we go from having this really large 70 plus law enforcement agencies that we're hoping to look at the data from to write this detailed report. And in reality, we're only getting maybe 6 responses. That says a lot, because a lot of times, and even then, the law enforcement agencies that are responding, who are carrying violent data information on violence, are one, state, county. They're not on reservation lands, because once we get to reservation lands, it becomes a matter of tribal reporting, or it becomes federal reporting. And those two are very hard to access as far as the information for data collection goes. So a lot of times the data is skewed. So the one flyer, the Urban Indian Health Institute, that's reporting 96%. That's I've seen that statistic reported a lot, and I've seen it used a lot. And I see people take that data, turn it around and use it. And a lot of times you're seeing these ideas that the violence, that these attacks, that the abuse is coming from non-Native people. But when in reality, you've got this whole other group of law enforcement, this whole other group of agencies who are working in the front lines, who are not being asked for data, who are not supplying that information. And I know in my own personal experiences, with the relatives I know, with the friends I know, with people who have experience, when I hear that data, when I hear 96%, my thought is, who is that? Who are these crimes? Where are they happening? Because I know with people that I'm working with and people that I know who are going through their own crises, that way too often the offenders are from our own tribal communities. They are Native people themselves. And so that's something that we don't get in a lot of these reports, that we're not seeing in a lot of flyers, that we're not seeing circulated in the media. So if you are not a government run organization, if you are not funded by a federal grant, a lot of times we're not seeing your information. So when we're looking at data collection and information sharing, we've got government-run organizations. We've got people who are funded by federal grants. Tribes often are funded by federal grants. And then we've got the frontline community service workers who are operating completely separately from this other organization. And then we've got these reports, we've got the data coming out, we've got all of these things happening. There's a huge break of information. There's a huge gap of communication happening. There's a big space of information sharing that's not being shared. And Renee talked about this a little bit earlier, and we're going to do this, we're going to build this out a little bit after our next break here. But how are organizations who are frontline using the data that you are collecting? How are you collecting data? Does your office organization collect and document information about their clients? And is that information being shared? Is it something that we take these forms and then they sit until one day they're destroyed after so many years have passed? Is this information being shared to outside agencies or universities in a way that it could turn into something that is maybe helpful or useful for your work, or for another agency or office that works in the same area as you? And then why are you collecting data? Are you collecting data in your offices? What do you do with it? What's the purpose of that? And is there a way that your agency or office can benefit from data collection and information sharing? So I want to open this up to a discussion here and take some time to invite you to share examples of forms or data collection methods as a means for planning, prevention, program services, customer support, patient advocacy, all of these reasons that are so important in the work that you do. Okay, let's see. So I see this is true everywhere. Non-government agencies are excluded from data collection. Data then becomes skewed. And that's exactly something that we see over and over. And then another comment, data is both important and always incomplete because methodology doesn't come into contact with those who are most marginalized, who are not accessing any direct service, but who are experiencing so much violence. Yes, exactly. So then my question to you, and this can be a write it out loud, type it in the chat. I'm sorry, say it out loud if you would like to share it, type it in the chat or just write it down. Are we missing opportunities as direct service providers to collect data that would help improve support services? Can we utilize multiple forms of data collection methods? I think hard copy, Google Forms is a big one that I've had to learn how to use. Online forms, phone calls, and maybe there's some big obstacles or problems that you're facing when you're attempting to collect data. These are some questions that I'd like to think about when we're talking about data and violence and the information shared around it. All right, we got a couple of responses in the chat and I want to read them out loud. And if you would like to add anything, please jump in. Michelle shares, I think in a clinical setting, it is hard to collect data due to HIPAA policies. I know the directors and BOD would have to be careful when trying to collect data. Yes. And Ada shares, federal funders should host tribal data roundtables to create forms relevant to tribal grant recipients. Many federal forms are too global or generic and don't fit tribal needs, a factor that makes it hard to use the data programs are required to collect. And then Monique asks a question, does anyone have data collection forms that they are willing to share? And I think that's a great question. And that's something that we're going to work with Renee next on. Similarly, it would be helpful for federal TA providers to help tribal programs create relevant and usable method forms to collect the data and then use in program policy and service delivery decisions. Indigenous research methods should also be incorporated in all federally funded studies in Indian country to ensure that the measures being used are culturally relevant, appropriate, and relatable to tribes. Yes. Yes, very good. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think we can table some thoughts there. Oh, I think something else just popped up in the chat. Some thoughts there, because this is something that we need to think about, is how are we in terms of the people looking at reports, the people looking for funding in the front lines using data. And unfortunately, that's the world we live in, and especially when it comes to violent crimes. If we will come back to looking at some of the ways that data is being collected and how can we maybe look at those forms and make adjustments to them. So shifting gears again, right now I want to talk about the media and how media plays a role in MMIWR, the role in our communities. And I think about media in a lot of different ways. I think about it in the big picture. What do we see? What are we taking in? You know, what are we reading? What are we hearing? What is being written? And that goes all the way from very large scale to very much small scale. And that includes our locally run news outlets, including newspapers, radio, TV, if you've got that in your communities. Um, and then that also includes social media. And that can be from a personal experience, that can be from what's being put out from your organization, from your office, from your agency, what is being shared. And I think that in the work of MMIWR, you've seen a lot of MMIWR articles and features being done about people who are advocating for their loved ones, and you see the statistics again. So the role of media is very important, and it's something that can be used in a lot of different ways. And as direct service providers, what are some of the ways that you're using media? Are you, I think of organizations putting ads in newspapers. I think of the pamphlets that you are handing out. What is being displayed in your office, in your own personal office space versus the lobby of your place of work? The media can be used on so many different scales that I think it's something that we have to think about, and it's something that's really important in how that is being handled. And as direct service providers, are there ways that you're utilizing media? And again, I encourage you to insert that in the chat. Do you have a flyer that you're using? This flyer right here comes from the coalition's Instagram, and this was well before I had met anybody who worked in the office here. This is when I was just a family member who was really searching high and low for resources in the community. And I was following the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women online, and they posted this flyer back in 2018 for a run that they were doing. They were doing community outreach, and I came across this, and my family and I ended up participating. We followed the guidance that they had of how to honor your loved one, how to run for your loved one, and it brought us all together. We had maybe 17 family members who came out and ran that day, and this was from an event, and then they posted online and they published it and they shared it, and it was, in different places that I was seeing. So I think about, the media and how that can be used, how that can be used to bring your customers, your clients in, and how it can be used to portray the work that it is that you're doing and the services that you are providing. You can work really, really hard and you can do your best, but if people don't know you exist or people don't know that you're out there advocating for them, you're missing a lot of clients. And so in that way, are there some changes that you can make with your media that you're using that can help better serve and protect relatives? And that's just one thought. I think that I'd like to invite you all to share anything that you have here in the chat. And I'd like you to make sure and save some of these ideas. We can come back to them after the next break and talk about, what is effective in terms of media and what we're sharing. This one is a big one, and this one was really hard. I wasn't quite sure if I should fit it in there and how I was going to do it, because I think about the balance of the work in the realm of MMIWR and male and female. And I don't say male and female in a way that is purely biological. I want to recognize that one. But I think in the way that I was raised and the way that I've handled a lot of this understanding of this violent crime that happened against my sister, what it took away from my family, the concept of justice, I've thought about that a lot. and I think about in the balance of male and female and how we view them. We hear a lot about the matriarchal ways. We know that in a lot of the traditional communities, a lot of our people were matriarchal, but also in those same traditional ways, a lot of our people were patriarchal, and as Native people. And now the word patriarchy has kind of become a bad word, where we throw it out there like, oh, the patriarchy, we want to bring it down. But in traditional senses is how I'm talking about it right now, because there are tribes who were traditionally patriarchal, in that you followed the male, you followed the male side of the family. Matriarchal, we follow the female side. And that's where I come from. My people who I come from are very much matriarchal. And with that comes the roles, and how do we, as matriarchal, as women, as men, as male, as female, how do we identify ourselves in the roles that we are assigned in our communities? I think that, again, this brings the thought of our personal biases that we may share against our roles. I know for a long time I resented having to be the strong woman. I resent having to be the strong Native woman at times. I just think like, I don't want to be the strong Native woman. I want somebody else to do it. But then I look around and I see my aunties and my grandma and everybody, taking the lead, as far as the women in my families go. But what about the men? And that's a question we hear a lot in this, in the work of MMIWR. Where are the men, and where do they fit in? Well, how come they don't come to rallies? You go to a MMIWR rally and there's predominantly women. And I think about that because I have men in my family who support the work that we're doing, but in a lot of ways, they're afraid to enter the space of MMIWR. So all I can think is that in some way, the balance in the natural world always restores itself. And the balance of male and female in the universe is so important. And that's what we've learned in our traditional teaching. So what is going on in this space, this workspace, that our male and female balances are off? And all I can, one thought that I had is, my husband, I share with him some of the stuff I do sometimes, and I'll ask him, well, what do you think about this? This is what I'm going to say, and I'm working on, or I'm working on my sister's case, and this is how I feel about it. And as soon as he gives me his opinion or he gives me his input, I'm immediately offended. He doesn't say anything offensive to be hurtful. He's just offering me a different approach, a different insight. And immediately I'm like, okay, never mind. I don't want your opinion. I don't want your thoughts. Because I think in some ways, we can, as the matriarchal, we can devalue the place of men in our lives and the place of men in these movements and in the way that we work, but it's because we're so sensitive to what has happened. And that's something that, I think that needs to be examined. And I think about, look at the head counts of our offices doing this work. What is the ratio of male to female? And maybe that's something that we can talk about. And I think it is something that we have to talk about, and we have to own up to what is going on. And maybe that's a hiring preference. Maybe that's a hiring plan. Maybe that's ensuring that if you invite someone into your space, that we're making it a point to try to restore the balance of the male and female in this work that we're doing right now. Because I hear often, how tired people are, women are, of doing the work. And I see it, and I think that there's something that we have to do to examine, our attitudes and the beliefs that are happening in our community that's making this a very much a normal thing. And I think with that same approach, we have to look at the prevention, the young people who we're raising in our communities, young males and young females, and what it is that we're teaching them. I think that we have that responsibility to our people in our communities, and as a part of our programs and everything that we're doing. I think in a lot of ways the work that is so it's reactive. The work is reactive, and I think the shift from reactive of trying to help and fix fix a problem, we also at the same time can kick in and start some proactive work where we're trying to do prevention. Um, so, and then just a few things. I think this is, what I'll end on here. And like I said, I feel like I touched on so many things. This is just a personal plea and also a big thank you, because I understand, it's a big ask. And I think that, you know, the humanity and dignity of how people are being treated who are experiencing violence and abuse is so important. Um, I think that as community members, it's so important that the way we see them and the way that they see us and the way that they see you, it really does matter, and it can make a big difference. I think the message of hope and the opportunity to help, that help is there, and that people can change, and that the resources are available, and that you are there with them, that you are an advocate, that you are a supporter, and that you're going to be there. That message is everything to people. I know, when somebody has told me that, and somebody has offered me help, and somebody has offered me guidance in the years of my sister's passing, that has meant everything to me. I have utilized email, and somebody respond, and nobody will, I'll send 10 emails and there would be no reply. And then that one email would come through. And that meant everything. I would call my mom and say, hey mom, I got an email response from this organization, this person, they're willing to listen, and they have these resources, and maybe they can help us. And I think that that is so important, as advocates, as resources, because you provide direct services. And with that, you have such a power to bring and create change in people's lives and in people's communities and in people's homes and families. And that is everything. And this is something, I just encourage, and we don't even get to touch on that today, but to be your biggest advocates and rally for your office and rally for your team, because if something is lacking, bring awareness to that, and I want to encourage you to get the help that you need, and make sure that the resources that are out there are being utilized. Because I think, like with the coalition, we're seeing this opportunity for people to come together from various parts of this whole area and this whole space, and the resources are there. And I think the coalition has some really great trainings that they do, and I've seen a lot of stuff that happens with it. And I think it's just that human connection in this work is so valuable. And so with that, I will take a break from talking and say thank you so much for this opportunity and for listening today. And I'll hand it over to Michelle. I think we've gone a little over on time here. And then Renee will be back, and we'll do some more workshopping this afternoon.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. So now we are going to have our next presentation and workshop. Give me 1 second while I get the names of it all set up. Okay, so we're going to be doing a workshop of understanding, is that the right one? Understanding and addressing violence.
Yes.
So yeah, okay, great. I was like, that says trans LGBT 101. Definitely part of understanding all of this.
Yes.
So we have Renee here with us, and Christine will also be joining us for the remainder of the time to continue learning and moving through this stuff. So with that, take it away.
All right, so welcome back, everyone. My name is Renee. Everyone has already known and sat through the morning presentation on the Trans LGBTQ 101. And so this portion of the workshop is more so of a reflective discussion portion. So I've hopefully you were able to print out or take a look at the booklet that I sent you guys this morning. And so one of the things that I really wanted to have a deep discussion about were 3 important things. I know there was supposed to be 2, but I figured I add 1 more just to kind of give it a more an array of activities. So hopefully it'll be good. So hopefully you were able to look at the questionnaire or the questions within that booklet that I sent regarding first impressions of trans LGBTQ people. And you've looked through those questions, and if not, we can give you a few minutes to take a look at that, and then we'll come back and we can maybe possibly have a short discussion about that, or however long we can. Again, most importantly, that these questions are more so of for reflective purposes only. And if you feel comfortable enough to share, you can certainly do that, because there are some questions there that kind of really, so it'll allow people to think beyond what they've know so far, especially when it comes to trans LGBTQ communities. Oftentimes some people were not exposed to them while growing up until later time in life. Some have really been connected to the community for quite some time because they have relatives who are trans or LGBTQ. So these questions really, it gravitates to a lot of different experiences. So hopefully take a look at that, and then we can come back again, maybe like 5 minutes with answers and reflective if you're willing to share or comfortable enough to share. There's also something we'll look through as well. It is let me see here, what was the intake form, as well as privilege for sale. So these 3 activities we'll be doing. Again, these are more so of just reflective because of the presentation that I provided this morning. You should be able to have a better understanding of the trans LGBT community and some of the violence that we face on a daily basis. And some we continue to combat on a daily basis, especially when it comes to discrimination. Healthcare is something I didn't really talk about, but healthcare has been one of the main issues that I've really combat, just because of the inadequate healthcare that I've received for a majority of my time as a trans person who has been accessing hormone therapy. So I've been on hormones for the past since 2000. And that's like almost 20 years. But I would say about 19 years I've been on hormones. I've been on Premarin, I've been on estradiol Valorate injections and estradiol. Now I'm on estradiol for I'm guessing about 10, 11, 12 years. I was on Premarin. And IHS was giving that out, and but we all, and I'm not sure if anyone knows the high risk of taking Premarin. And imagine that I was on that for 12 years. And so, yeah, so now again, IHS has come a very long ways when it comes to providing adequate healthcare. Again, I'm fortunate enough to have an awesome doctor here in Gallup, Dr. Wei, who has patients all across the reservation who traveled just to Gallup just to get this awesome healthcare from Dr. Wei, who was transferred from, or who came from San Francisco and worked specifically with the trans community in San Francisco. So she has this great knowledge of working with trans people, and she's come here to the Navajo Reservation to help us. So we've been fortunate enough that she's here, and I speak to her on a regular basis, and she says that she has no thoughts or wants to leave the reservation. She feels comfortable here. So again, we're very fortunate to have her here, because we've not had a doctor, or I've not had a doctor personally, that really knows how to provide adequate trans healthcare. Often, usually back when, like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I used to hitchhike to Albuquerque or to Crown Point just to get healthcare. And so now I just go to Gallup, and 20, 30 miles away from my house, drive there and go in as an actual patient instead of a teacher telling my doctor what I need to do. Go in there and feel comfortable enough to share my story and my experiences, and she's able to give me healthcare, which is great, which is awesome. So you have your cover page and then the table content, then who am I? You have to see a picture of me. What is trans LGBTQ 101? And then it'll be introductions, group norms, and then your first impressions of LGBTQ people, I should say. So the first question would be, when's the first time you can remember learning that some people are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or queer? Number 2 is, where did most of the influence of your initial impressions, understanding of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and queer people come from? When's the first time you can remember learning that some people are transgender? Where did most of the influence of your initial impression, understanding of transgender people come from? And number 5, how have your impressions, understanding of trans LGBTQ people change or evolve throughout your life? and then we'll go into vocabularies. I do apologize for not giving you directions on where to find that, and I'm not sure why the page number didn't update there. Let's see here. Probably go like this. This is actually taken from a safe zone training that I usually do for organizations, more specifically for schools. Let's see here one second. And so I just basically took the same manual that I usually provide safe zone safe zone participants. And so these are some of the things that we go through on a safe zone training. And typically safe zone training runs 4 hours long. And we divulge into a lot of very important information when it comes to working with and providing safe spaces for transgender and lesbian, gay, bisexual people within a school setting, within an organization, within a medical setting. So the safe zone training is definitely able to tailored for any types of organizations to provide better services or to have better understanding for frontline workers to assist with the population. So this is from that training that I do as well. And so you'll see a lot of information from there, from like core vocabularies to how do's and don'ts of inclusiveness, the umbrella, the genderbread person, privileges for sale, which we'll also go into, coming out, the do's and don'ts, and frequently asked questions to give you the answer questions that usually typically some people have asked, and what if it's going to be a good answer or not. Scenarios is also a really good tool to utilize, especially when you're implementing a lot of these information within your organizations. Scenarios are a great way to also role play. And I do believe role play is an excellent and very informative learning process to implement a lot of these new information you're trying to implement within your organization. And so I honestly believe scenarios and role playing is definitely a good way to teach your frontline workers or anyone within your organization in implementing a lot of these new information that you have learned. Work stages, basically just how to utilize and implement this within your work. Also resources, quite a few resources there as well. First impressions. Again, you can write some answers to the list of the questions, and if there are questions that you feel you're unable to answer or you're struggling with, go ahead and skip that and maybe come back to that. And again, and hopefully you're able to answer all of them. All right. So in journals, hopefully you're able to write this in your journals as well. And this is a great activity for you to write down some information that you feel uncomfortable in talking about in an open space, or something you feel comfortable talking about. And again, some questions to ask yourself, like, how did this activity make you feel? And oftentimes when it comes to asking yourselves, like, what do I really know about the trans LGBT community? And oftentimes you think, oh, I was told they're like this or they're like that. And that's where we tend to develop a lot of our personal views and opinions about the trans LGBT community. And so it's also a good segue for you to think, oh, why do I think this way? Why do I believe this? Was I able to develop and create my own opinions about this particular community? Although as a service provider, I do work with this community. Like, what is my perception of that particular community that I'm serving or advocating for? Or if you consider yourself an ally, like, are you truly an ally? Like, do you really believe that trans people are real women? Or do you believe that sex work is real work? Like, some of these things are some questions that tend to come out when it comes to doing these type of activities, because we feel that our thoughts and our opinions about the trans LGBT community is very limited, and oftentimes it is told by someone else who had very limited information about this particular community. So it's really good to really step back and say, okay, are these good opinions, or are these developed from someone else's opinion that came from hate or ignorance or some other place? Next question is, does anyone have something they came up does anyone have something that came up for them while they were answering the questions that they would like to share? Again, this is something you don't have to share. Maybe if you feel comfortable enough, definitely share.
Hi, Renee. So
Hi.
my name is Jackie, and I just wanted to share as I sort of reflecting, I guess, as you were talking. So it was actually kind of funny. Growing up, my parents never taught me about like the trans community or, you know, gay, lesbian, all of that. Like I just grew up knowing that everybody is who they are and that's what they are. And it is so funny. So actually I started work before I came into the position that I am now. And so it was at my previous work, she worked there, and this is an individual that I worked with, I'll just say. And so, you know, she came in and I just started working with her. And she kind of seemed a little, to me anyway, from what I gather from body language, I guess, she seemed a little weary of me, or just not fully, I don't know, but you know, I didn't see her as I'm so sorry, correct me if I'm wrong.
You're fine. You're fine. So
So
whatever, if you feel uncomfortable, just
yeah.
again, this is a teaching moment and also learning moment
Yeah.
for yourself as
Okay.
well. So if there is something that you just, if you don't know how to say it, just say it. And
Okay.
yeah.
So she's a trans woman. Okay. And then, like, you know, I didn't see her, that I didn't know that's what she was. So then, like, you know, a few weeks go on, and then she finally comes up to me, and she kind of just, you know, apologizes and says, you know, I'm so sorry that I have been, and I think she kind of recognized it in herself. She's like, I'm sorry if I've been kind of standoffish and not very, you know, and then she just kind of came out and said it to me. She's like, you know that I used to be a man. And I kind of looked at her and I was like, oh my goodness. I was like, I didn't even, that never crossed my mind. And I would have never thought that. And that was kind of one of the things she said. She, you know, I'm so sorry. She kind of cried a little bit, and she said, I've never met anyone, you know, that has just treated me like anyone else, or that was like not the first thing that I've ever anyone's noticed. And you were actually the first person that just, you know, I could feel that sense of trusting, but I also wasn't sure. So, and then since then, you know, I guess she felt more like a safe place with me, a safe space with me. And we developed this friendship, which is really great now. Like, you know, I'm really good friends with her. But I definitely saw, you know, heard and saw a lot of the talk around her. So just things that they would be like, you know, I don't know how to act around him or her. And so I was always just, you know, correcting. I didn't know much about it still at that time, but I'm like, I think she wants to be referred to as she or her. Or if you don't know, she likes her name. So, and then I would say, you know, her name and let them know, and they would just be like, oh, so you know. And I'm like, well, yeah, like, you know, just be mindful and respectful of that. So I guess in some ways I didn't I was an unknown ally to things like that, I guess is the word. But it was really eye-opening. And I feel bad sometimes for the people that I encounter, that they have to label themselves to other people just because they may think that they're giving off the wrong impression or things like that. But I just think as an individual looking outside, I don't think of things like that. They're just people to me, very unique people. But until like they obviously say something, then I see it as that now, or if they want me to, I guess is another word. But I just wanted to share that little story.
That is actually a really awesome story, and you definitely portrayed some really good allyship characteristics, especially when you spoke like, okay, she prefers to be referred to as, this is her name. Those are definitely great ways to really advocate for better treatment within your office, or to show, you know what, this is a person as well, and she prefers to be referred to as, and she uses pronouns. I think it's the smallest things that definitely make the biggest impact, I truly believe, especially when you first encounter with someone who's trans, and they obviously don't look like female, but they're like they have like
Yeah.
these, yeah. So the best thing you could do, if you truly don't understand, or truly don't want to say, are you a man or woman, or how do you, what are you, basically, is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
So the best, like the smallest things make the biggest impact. And when it comes to working with trans community, like, what are your pronouns? Simple
Mhm.
as that can definitely like melt 1,000 pounds off a trans person's shoulder, because, oh, this
Right.
person knows who I am. This person sees me. This person is listening to me. This person hears me. It's the smallest things that make the biggest impact. And asking someone about the pronouns, if you're unsure of how they identify, that's the most, that would make all barriers of crash and fall and burn. And this person who identifies as a trans person, well, okay, yes, I like this person. I like coming here. I feel comfortable coming here.
Yeah.
Again, it's that very first impression. If it's a bad experience, then they never can come back. If they have a first good experience, then definitely they'll come back and say, oh yes, this person is helpful. Yes, this person is awesome. This office is awesome. The people there are awesome. You need to go there. You need to be there, and you'll have an influx of trans community or LGBT community coming to your office, because that very first impression, the smallest thing, will have a definite huge impact. And so, asking someone about the pronouns and some of the things that you've done are definitely some great ways to really advocate for better treatment within your office, and how to really get people to understand that this person is a person, this person is trans, and this is how they want to be referred to as. Yes. Yeah. It's awesome for
Yeah.
that. Thank you for
And
sharing.
yeah, of course. I just want to add though, and I mean, I'm not, obviously talking bad about anybody, but it was some of our older generation that I worked with as well that didn't understand that. So I was always like, I think, we should refer to her like this, prefer, and I think after a while they just were like, oh, okay, and totally forgot, that, she may be different to them, kind of thing. So it was really nice. And I just felt, I think it goes back to just being kind to everybody and not having biases against anything or anyone, and just accepting obviously people who they are, and all kinds of shapes and sizes, I guess.
That is very true. But yeah, it's a something that can easily be done, but yet it's a struggle for a lot of people to undo a lot of what they've been told for,
Right.
especially older generation. They've been learning this for what, 50, 60, 70 years, and
Oh
having to
yeah.
teach them something new is like they cannot grasp, because they're so used to what they've been taught for most of their lifetime. But again, it is our human nature to be curious. We want to ask questions, we want to know why, and we are a society that tends to love to label everything, and we have to have labels. And so presentations like this definitely help create more labels for you to learn. But again, it's just a part of our society that we live in. We have to create labels in order for us to understand what this certain thing is, or what that person is, or how they identify. Again, we're just trying to create a better and more friendly place for trans LGBT people to exist within a society that already exists. We just need to recreate some things. Yeah. But thank you again for sharing.
Hi, Renee. Can you hear me? This is Marina.
Yes, I can.
Hi. So this morning, not to revert back, but I've worked corrections for 23 years, and you mentioned something that was really broke my heart for you. And when you said about, being pulled into areas where they would search you and look at you and stuff, and just, creating that shame, that was very upsetting to me. And I'm sorry for that, for you. But with that being said, as a female working corrections, and we would have, people come in, the officers would say, that's a he, not a she, so on and so forth, and, just be very demeaning.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I always did or tried to do is I would ask her, do you prefer a female to search you or a male? Because as a female officer, we were to search either or, although males were only allowed to search males. And
Mhm.
so I always took it upon myself to try to make that person, even though they were being arrested or whatever the case was, to feel comfortable and be okay with asking to be, searched by the person that they felt they would be more comfortable with. And so, on some of the questions that you asked, I started at a very young age. I was 19. Um, you know, Went into this world of corrections that it's a whole world of itself.
It really is.
And
It really is.
I just, as the years have gone on, I've moved on and gone into healthcare. And so, with that being said, as an ombudsman for Presbyterian Health Plan, I've had many cases where transgender issues have come up, or in reference to medical care, or the way people were being treated, or just even the intake process. So I also sat on a committee to ensure that we were asking the questions appropriately, uh, educating our staff members on how to, ask questions that are sensitive to that person, or maybe they didn't have any training at all and needed that training. So those were some of the areas that I think I've really tried to focus on in my career.
Okay, I'm going to read a comment from Monique. I have learned so much in the last year, which is sad because I'm 40 and just learning so much that I never knew. Last year, I learned I was dehumanizing my 2S LGBTQ relatives by labeling them by the stereotypes and things I heard growing up. Many natives I grew up around, relatives and friends, are very homophobic. Things that are a part of the culture are homophobic, and I didn't even realize it because it was the norm. I was recently at a powwow and the MC announced the two-step and said it was only for straight people because that other stuff doesn't belong around the drum, which pissed me off and people around me laughed. Just wow. Yeah, I think, thank you for sharing, Monique.
We had Preston here who has done Trans 101 trainings and was offering to share their perspective and stuff like that. So welcome, Preston, impromptu.
Oh, cool. Hey, everybody. I'm Preston. I use he and him pronouns. And yeah, I was thinking I could share a little bit, maybe more context about what I have found useful as a trans person when working with service providers and things that I know about, different pockets of trans communities. So, Ms. Gray talked about the prevalence of intimate partner violence, particularly for trans women of color. And what I think could be a helpful next step for folks on this call could be to learn more about what are the common health issues that trans people face in general and within different trans communities. So for example, yes, trans women of color are at highest risk of intimate partner violence. And within that, when trans women disclose that they have HIV, that is the highest set of risk factors for predicting like if a trans woman of color is going to be experiencing intimate partner violence. So, you know, trans women and other trans people who do sex work, there's a whole slew of associated health risks with that. One way or another, HIV is prevalent. With trans men, and actually both with trans men and trans women, you'll often find a history of eating disorders. Anecdotally, I've seen more trans men talk about that because the ways that we experience body dysmorphia, where you know, to kind of like get a flatter, thinner frame, you know, it requires having to starve ourselves sometimes, to be honest. So I would say if you could look into, mental health, the ways in which name change processes in your jurisdiction are low barrier, high barrier, and you can work with advocates in your area to make it easier to get those documents changed. Those are some big things. I know with, so some of the girls, when I lived in DC, they were at what I mean by sex work. Oh, okay, yes, definitely. So people who engage in sex either in exchange for money or for other resources like housing, food, substance use, that's what we mean by sex work. It's historically been known as prostitution, though that's only one very specific part of sex work. And if you're not someone who does that kind of sex work, the best way to say it is just to say sex work. Some people may identify as prostitutes, you know, but just sex work is your safest umbrella word. When I lived in DC, some of the girls I would hang out with before they were able to get health insurance, let alone health insurance that would cover either hormone therapy or other kinds of like gender affirming therapies, they would inject silicone, you know, to in their breasts, in their butts, in their hips, in their thighs. And there was, you know, high risks of injection related health issues, getting infections, having bad silicone because you're just getting it from, you know, who knows on the street, you know, really word of mouth when it comes to how trans people access healthcare is a big deal, like Renee said. So yeah, there are these little networks where trans people are like, oh, this doctor 3 states away, you know, help me get surgery. And so there are all the associated risks with like having to travel far to get access to services, having to do dangerous things to get access to services. And one of the ways that you can be a really helpful support is just really being a listening ear, being non-judgmental, and trying to basically just harm reduction plan with the folks that you're working with. Like, okay, so it's inevitable, you know, you need to raise X amount of money so you can get your hormone shot. How can we help make a plan with you so that you're as safe as possible while you need to make that money? Or how can we make sure that like you're having access to new needles, that you're not sharing needles, or, you know, other small ways like this that are non-judgmental, that really demonstrate that like you're in it with them. You want to support their autonomy, recognizing that this is a messed up world, especially for trans women, especially for trans women of color. And you know that you can't be their savior. They don't want you to be their savior, but you're there to be that safety planning buddy. Same thing for trans men. You know, I am fortunate to live in a place where we have legalized syringe exchanges because I do inject my hormones. Although my syringe exchange, if you are involved in your syringe exchange, doesn't actually carry the needles I specifically use. Anyways, so there's lots that you can learn about the syringe and needle types that trans men and trans women use. There's a lot you can learn about, like, how do I counsel a harm reduction kind of approach to supporting this client's autonomy, because that's how you maintain the trusting relationship too. Because I bet you, yeah, that girl standing in front of you has been through some stuff that you cannot imagine. And that typical circles of support that you may have access, that like a non-transgender client may have access to, is probably not on the table for a lot of trans people who may come to your services, if they come to your services. I would say that there does need to be a lot of trust rebuilding between service providers and trans communities. And this is like a really important part of it. And I'm really grateful that Ms. Renee was invited to be a presenter and to share her experiences with you all. I think the last thing I'll say, yeah, is sometimes the stuff about your government documents really can get in the way of a lot of things for trans people, whether it's like trying to access government housing, or in general, just like, I don't want to go to a place that I have to show my ID. And if you can be like a solid ally and be like, you know, I know it's going to be hard to access this service because you have to use your legal name. Like, how can I support you? That can make all the difference. And really just recognizing that every documentation, government documentation level there is, trans people are going to be like, oh no, you know, and getting over that hurdle can be with supportive allies is really helpful. And yes, please, people, ask questions. Happy to answer.
Thank you, Preston. Thank you for jumping in. Sorry to put you on the spot like that, but I think in a normal human to human setting, it would just become that would be a very natural discussion for us to have. So thank you for helping us with that.
Thank you all for your patience as we pivot in front of your faces. By the way, everybody, hello, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Tati, and thank you, Michelle. Sorry, I've got a little person here. I can't remember. She'll pop in a minute, I'm sure. But in reflection, so the way this had originally was set up to go was Renee was going to finish her activity and discussion, and we were going to look at forms from a new perspective, really, and thinking about programs and how information is collected. Somebody walks into your office and we're immediately looking for information about them. And I think Preston mentioned it a little bit too about the use of these forms and how traditional they are. And in a lot of ways, they can be discriminatory. They can turn people away. People just don't want to have to fill them out. You have to present an ID. And there's so many obstacles we don't think about when it comes to, when it comes to paperwork, and how if somebody doesn't have an ID because they've lost it, because they are in a violent relationship, or somebody as a form of retaliation or abuse has thrown away their purse or their wallet, so now they no longer have ID. You know, the steps you have to go through to get something so simple to prove identification can be really difficult, or a birth certificate. I know at the peak of my sister's relationship that it was such a difficult thing for her to keep her documents that my mom would usually carry her birth certificate or her social security card, because we knew if she lost them that she would be denied access for help, for medical help, for anything like that. So we always made sure to keep extra copies of stuff. So fast forwarding into the thinking of, you know, how can, you know, people who are working in frontline, let me see, I'll just show you guys the baby, because she's a part of this conversation. She was crying for me, so I went and got her. That's where I disappeared to for a little bit. So anyhow, thinking about the forms that we're using. Sorry, I feel like she's gonna be such a distraction for me. I wasn't planning on her being up here, but she wants to be a part of it. But let's use this time to reflect on a document or a form that you are using on a regular basis. So whether that's daily, weekly, monthly, hourly, you've got people coming in seeking services. And the question that we really wanted to ask is, can these forms or documents be changed? Can they be updated to be more inclusive? Whether that be directed towards someone's gender identity, or directed towards somebody who maybe doesn't have all of their paperwork in order, their identification. I'm trying to think of some other obstacles, but is there something that can be added or removed that will make your forms, your paperwork more effective? And maybe there's some ideas that can be shared here of ways that we can utilize documentation. And I want to really open this up to a discussion, because I think as the community service workers, a lot of you know best what some of the biggest obstacles are when it comes to forms. Oh, let's see, Diane Sandoval.
Hello, I'm with Guadalupe Credit Union, and I actually have some staff on here as well. And we were trying to find ways to serve women and anyone in these types of situations, but we do see quite often that having proper documentation to open accounts and get loans, even apply for housing assistance, those things can really be a barrier. We've also added onto our platform a way to label the accounts with also known as. So if they do go by another name or another way to identify themselves, we're able to accommodate that, but we're still looking for more ways to be more inclusive.
Thank you, Diane. Yeah, I think that's a really good example. Housing, medical care, food, jobs, all of these things require documentation. Renee had a good slide on this, but because I Googled some forms here. So I just wanted to pull up, I looked at some different quick examples of some different intake forms that are used. And these are pretty common. I think a lot of the stuff we're looking at, these look like they're used by maybe a private company, not so much like if you were going to an IHS or another government run place that provides services. And this one stood out to me because it looks like so many of the intake forms you've seen, and for somebody who is able to check all the boxes of the norm, this would be a pretty easy form to fill out. But if you do not have a physical address, you do not have a regular home phone number, maybe you don't have an emergency contact person, these forms can be really intimidating to fill out. So when I think about removing some of these things, or maybe making them a little more optional, a little more flexible, maybe even just the history, sometimes I know that can be, people aren't ready to talk about their history on these kinds of forms, and because of maybe the community that they're getting services in, small community, if I write somebody's name on here, it's going to be seen by office staff. I think there's a lot of things that we have to think about. So this one is just a very simple example. Like I said, Renee had a pretty good example when it comes to how we can support people who want to be identified, maybe in a way that's not the normal gender identities. But if anybody wants to take a look at this intake form and share any thoughts on what you see could be different, that could be utilized in a different way, I think that would be really helpful. Okay, and I see Preston shared, not having government docs are sometimes the reason people can lose a housing opportunity. Yes, I've seen that. And I wish forms explicitly named, this form requires a legal name because of this reason, this regulation, this law. And or like, can you as a service provider subvert pushback administratively about whether legal first name is necessary? Yeah, I think names is a big one. When in my sister's case, I talked a little bit, I'm gonna stop the screen share, a little bit about the media, and in where we were from, the newspaper published a lot of articles about her at the time in the crime and the incident, everything that happened. And they used a name that was given to authorities by her abuser. So in a lot of the paperwork, it was the name that he had given, and he claimed her spouse, and it became written document. And that was one of the biggest obstacles we had throughout the time, is that we kept having to go back and get a lot of the paperwork amended, because this one account, verbal account, is what the newspapers took. And it was written down onto paperwork, and that was it. It wasn't, none of it was even legal information. Ada said, sometimes we are asked to provide proof of residence using utility bills, bank statements that often don't have both spouses. This is a major barrier, ID, for getting a new ID, driver's license. Yes.
I think with that, living in tribal communities on the reservation, like when I was living back at home in Ninanzad, Fruitland area, they couldn't renew my license because they didn't recognize my address. And I'm like, well, you know, I live on the Navajo Nation and we don't have physical addresses. So it was just, that was a barrier for me. And I don't know if many of you experienced that, but providing that proof of residency and having a physical address was tough. And then also, let's see, what Preston and I think it was just Preston mentioned, how, you know, people looking into like housing programs or different resources, it's just difficult to obtain those services because of the documents they require. So I remember when I was a case manager, I was like a huge advocate for the transgender community here in Albuquerque, and they, you know, were faced with prejudice from like apartment landlords going to the MVD. So I would, you know, accompany them to be their support, and you know, help them through this process of obtaining housing or their driver's license. So yeah, there's a lot that we need to do. And I know a clinic here in Albuquerque, they took the initiative to change their whole intake documents and for it to be more inclusive of our LGBTQ and transgender community. So with the documents Christine shared, I don't know how many of direct service providers we have here. If you want to share, like, did your organization or program you're working for, did they make changes to their intake documents?
Hey, Michelle, what, I'm curious, when you say that they changed their intake process, what, do you have any idea or examples of what that included?
Yeah, so I wish I saved a copy of it, but they made sure with the gender portion, it wasn't just male and female. So they added like transgender female, transgender male, non-binary, and then I wish I had a copy of it, but yeah, that's the examples I can give right now. Oh, and then preferred name, that's what it was.
We also have some comments in the chat that I'm going to read out.
Okay.
These are from like the last 15 minutes. So let's see. Preston said, I wish forms explicitly name this form requires legal name because of X law or X regulation, and or like, can you as a service provider subvert/push back administratively about whether legal first name is necessary? Sometimes we are asked, Adam Milton says, sometimes we are asked to provide proof, quote unquote, of residence using utility bills, bank statements that often don't have both spouses. This is a major barrier for getting new IDs or real IDs. Monique says, when it comes to domestic violence, I think you always have to consider why they're asking these questions, because everything should be considered, quote unquote, discoverable by a defense attorney if you ever went to court. The way you answer certain questions can put you at risk for losing custody of your children. Linnell says they also don't realize that most of the mail is received at a PO box instead of the address on the ID or D. Ida Melton adds, however, I have used my tribal ID to get on planes in New Mexico as proof to get a real ID driver's license. Gladys says, as an organization, how would we advocate, or this is a question, as an organization, how would we advocate or help getting items like IDs at DMV without the address?
Yeah, so
Great.
with that question, Gladys, the clinic I used to work for, we would use the clinic's address. So we would provide an affidavit and have it notarized stating that they are using the address of the clinic to receive their mail. So we present that document to the MVD, and then they would just receive an ID, a state ID. And that's here in New Mexico. I don't know how other states would work with that.
Yeah, I think it depends on where you live. I also was going to say some tribal programs, because of the issue with addresses on reservation lands and how that affects mail, physical addresses are already a lot more flexible when it comes to mail going to a different address, or the physical address is definitely a luxury recognized by like the US Postal Service, FedEx, and then of course like health providers. They know a lot of times people's addresses is a complicated thing.
So we're almost at 4:00. Tatiana, did you want to do that one last game really quick before we go into the like discussions, more discussions?
Hey, I see a message from Monique. Can you please explain how to do the privileges for sale game, how it works? I really want to do all of these with my staff. Okay, privileges for sale. That was a Renee.
Yeah.
Renee, that was a Renee thing, Monique. She had the slides for that. And then we talked about it before, so I do kind of understand, but I don't feel comfortable at all jumping in and taking over her show on that. Plus she has the slides that show all of the different privileges we have. Yeah, that we lost a lot when Renee got off the call today, guys. Unless, I don't know if Michelle or anybody with Coalition has an understanding for that. Monique has a request on it instead. So here's an example that comes from Renee's slides or work that she was going to speak about. But this was part of this activity here. And here's an example of a document and utilizing a different language in asking for someone's information on a form. So as we've talked about, preferred name, and that gives a bit of a description on why someone might have a preferred name. And then below that, legal name. And then here's a good option on the boxes, and this sounds like maybe what Michelle was talking about earlier, but sex assigned at birth, female or male, and making that an inclusive part of the paperwork. And here's an example down at the bottom there of what, how just changing the language on some of these forms and then adding in some more options could be really inclusive. So any questions or thoughts here on this one? This was in the chat box. If you scroll up to the top, and that's what I was getting at. Renee shared the document that had some information about her and the exercises that were done earlier, and then this PDF document as well as an example for some changes, some very small changes that probably have a very impact on intake forms. Okay, and if nothing, I'll pass it back to you, Michelle. Sorry, you were directing in a direction and then I jumped in on that. I just seen it.
Okay, so let's see here. Preston mentioned some trans folks have an adverse reaction to preferred name because that's my real name. And so another suggestion would be name that you want us to call you. So for the part of the hour, we're just gonna think about the documents, that you use in your intake process. So what Christine shared and what Renee shared on the example of intake forms, just think about, when you do your intake, what do you think could be added or removed, or what could be more effective? So this is a time where we all can work together. You all as direct service providers and advocates, I'm going to give you this time to brainstorm new ideals and how to utilize our ideals into documents or media that is shared. Hello, everyone. So I hope that breakout room session helped each other learn more about your roles as direct service providers and advocates. And I hope that you shared new ideals on how to have a better intake process. So we're gonna, Christine, did you want to start the reflection? Who wants to volunteer? Who wants to tell us about what your group talked about?
I can go.
Okay.
I just basically talked to my group that, I'm from Fairbanks. Well, I'm not. I work in Fairbanks, Alaska. I live in North Pole. But I explained that our community is so small that since COVID had hit, it was about the time COVID hit, we have had so many people missing in our community. One guy as early as March had went missing, and lucky enough they found him 3 days later. He was in his early 20s. And we have been holding vigils for them. Just last week, my office consists of 12 people, and we went out to the bridge and, said a prayer, took our pictures with our missing and murdered shirts, and we put roses in the river, with our prayer, and the ice started moving. And so, to us, that just shows that they know that we're still thinking of them. They're not forgotten. And another thing I brought up was that in our community, all of a sudden we have so much sex trafficking. We were not aware of, what to do. And in July, we're actually going to have a team come up and, just basically train us and other organizations in our community, the troopers, the city police, North Pole, and the military bases. And I also stated that we know that there is a house out by the airport that is sex trafficking. The airport police are aware of it. It's just that they have to catch them. That's what it comes down to. But, the awareness is there. And I actually spoke that I am not only my case manager, but I'm a prevention specialist. So since all of this is going on, my feathers have been ruffled, and I have been ordering things offline and putting awareness out there. I had mentioned that, you know, we are community service. We have a Title VI grant, which, you know, we provide meals for the elders and, you know, just group talks and stuff like that. So one of my things is that I am going to get the awareness out to the elders because so many of them are raising their grandchildren. And so, you know, that's going to be part of my prevention awareness to them. So, you know, just that this kind of stuff doesn't happen in our community. And I feel it's just my part for my community is to get the awareness out. Just last month, we had a child awareness, protection awareness month to where we had last year it was a drive-through, but this year, you know, since COVID had somewhat went down, we did our whole parking lot of activities for the kids. We had pizza, we had a DJ, play music. A couple of us dressed up as baby sharks, and you know, we had a mascot that we call her Molly of Denali, and she came out, and it was just a fun day. You know, it's been so long that our community has been together, and so we just put that out there for Child Awareness Month. And so my thing right now is that we need to train the elders. We need to, you know, just get the awareness out that not only do we have missing people, I don't want to say murdered because, you know, it's not official, but these people are missing. My uncle was murdered. I believe he was murdered. My family has accepted what the trooper said, but I haven't. And my niece died about 7 years ago, and she was murdered by her ex-boyfriend. So, you know, my heart is there, and I just want to get the awareness out to everybody. And these trainings are just what I need, because every training I go through, I learn more, and I feel, you know, our community is still back in the old days. You know, we're trying to move forward, but, you know, we're up here in God's country. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Yeah. I like how you said you do community get-togethers. That's good. Here in Albuquerque, I know the city of Albuquerque, they do block parties in our international district. So because the crime rates are so high in the international district in Albuquerque, which is also called the war zone, that they're doing this new initiative where they're setting up at different community centers and doing block parties, you know, because they want the community to feel safe again. And also just to make that presence there, the presence known, like this is a community. We have children here, we have elders, and we want to keep it safe. But yeah, they have different providers and organizations who set up tabling with their like pamphlets and just like different swag, and they have music. Sometimes they have a Zumba instructor go there, and then you have like community, you know, participating in the Zumba dances. So yeah, I like that. I like that your community is, you know, reclaiming their community, like trying to make it safe again.
Yes. And one thing, you know, that we try so hard to get out there, just because we're, you know, Fairbanks Native Association, it's not Native. We are a community service organization. So we service the community. It's just not natives. And so, yeah, it was wonderful. There was so many people here this year. I mean, last year was very dead. I mean, I think we had maybe 75 people. This year we had over 300 people participate, and that's a lot for us. That is a lot. So yeah, I mean,
yeah, it's the little wins.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to share any new ideals you talked amongst your group?
I'll share, Michelle. In our group, I had a person who works with the finance. She works with the banks, a financial institution, and she talked about getting access to loans and bank accounts, and that financial abuse that can play a big role in controlling someone's life and leaving a violent relationship. And so I said, she was talking about different things they did, how she was able to work with youth to get around the requirement for an ID. And I was listening to her and I thought, this is the first time I think I've seen a financial institution working in this realm of violent crimes and MMIWR. So I thought that was really interesting, because that's a big part of controlling someone is their access to money or their ability to be financially independent. So I thought that was really cool. And she works here in New Mexico, and she said they give presentations on auto loans, on emergency loans, on private loans, and what the access to those looks like for somebody who can maybe qualify or apply for them.
Wow, I did not know that too. Wow, that's good. So we're gonna step away from our group discussions, and I wanted to know from you individually, like, what information stood out to you from today's training, and what can you take back to your workspace? And also, is there a new goal you would like to set in your response to today's training? So I just want to hear your thoughts and, what you learned today and what you want to take back to your community and workspace.
I'm Beaver Northcloud, and I'm the prevention coordinator for the Pueblo of Jemez. And I'm tasked with getting information, education and awareness out to the community. And what I would like to do is to change the pervasive attitude that human trafficking, MMIWR is out there. It's everywhere else, but not here. I want folks to be aware. I want them to know that, we're not immune to any of that. And that's what I got from this training, and also education on the whole LGBTQ realm. There's some set ideas just because they don't know anything else. So that's what I'm taking away from this training, is I really need to step up my game with the outreach and education.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And in the chat from Linnell, they mentioned, I got a better understanding about transgender protocols, or what to ask. Yes. From Bernadine, I have a better understanding on the MMIWR and how to approach the transgender protocols. I know there's community members needing education, so our program will make a goal of addressing these areas. That's good. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that.
I want to thank you, Michelle, and the coalition for inviting myself to be a part of this today. And I think, the supporters, the family members in the community, are a big part of figuring out where the gaps are in this work. And thank you to all of the community service providers who are here today. It's the frontline workers who really help make a difference here. So I want to give you my appreciation and your support in the work that you're doing. Yeah, and I think that's it, Michelle. I just appreciate this opportunity. So thank you to everybody.
Thank you, Christine. Yeah, so we're going to end a little bit early. We covered everything, and And I'm so sad Renee lost internet services. So if you have any questions or if you will like a presentation done for your organization, you can reach out to the coalition. And I put my email in the chat also. But yeah, I just, today has been really wonderful to meet all of you and to hear the work that you're doing and, how to how to make your community safe and, just keep providing those important resources. And I thank you, Christine and Renee, for presenting. But yes, and then Honey just put in the chat, if you want to get a certificate, you would have to complete the evaluation, and the link is in the chat. So, but thank you, Ahiyehet, to everyone that has been with us all day today. It was an 8-hour day, and again, I want to express my gratitude to you all, and I hope you learned a lot and you can take this back to your community.